And this is a Fox News alert tonight. In the wake of the deadly terror attacks in Paris, the 2016 Democratic presidential candidates are squaring off in their second debate. So what are they saying about their plans to defeat ISIS? Joining us live tonight from Des Moines, Iowa, our own Ed Henry. Ed.
Good to see you, Sean. It's interesting because in the first 20 minutes or so of this debate here in Iowa, Hillary Clinton very much on defense about ISIS, in part because of those, large part because of the Paris terror attacks. At one point, she said, "I do not believe we're at war with radical Islam." The reaction to that online and overnight will be very interesting. She also at one point was trying to break with President Obama by saying, "I do not think that ISIS can be contained," a rebuke of what the president told ABC News just yesterday before the attacks. But then she went on to sort of agree with the president that America cannot take the lead in this, that we have to have our allies in the Mideast take the lead. She said at one point, quote, "This is not America's fight." Interesting, because fellow Democrat Martin O'Malley really objected to that and said, "I disagree with Secretary Clinton. This is America's fight. We can't do it alone, but this is America's fight." Another interesting moment was when Bernie Sanders, a Democratic Socialist senator, was pressed on what he had said in the first debate in Vegas, that he believes climate change is our biggest national security threat. John Dickerson from CBS News, the lead moderator, who's done a really good job of contrasting the records but staying to substance, not just making it a food fight, pressed him and said, "Senator Sanders, are you still believing that climate change is the biggest national security threat, even after Paris and what happened just yesterday?" And Bernie Sanders said, "Yes, absolutely. This is our biggest national security threat." And he said it's directly tied to terror. So some pretty interesting moments. Secretary Clinton on defense throughout this debate, Sean.
All right, Ed Henry, thanks so much for being with us. The 2016 Republican presidential candidates have also been commenting on the attacks in Paris. And here's what Donald Trump said earlier today.
When you look at what happened in that case, it was just reported, one from Syria. Our president wants to take in 250,000 from Syria. I mean, think of it, 250,000 people. When you look at Paris, you know, the toughest gun laws in the world, Paris. Nobody had guns but the bad guys. You can say what you want, but if they had guns, if our people had guns, if they were allowed to carry, it would have been a much, much different situation.
Now, many of the other candidates have also come out against the attacks and offered support to the French people. Here now tonight with reaction, the author of the brand new book, Duplicity, former Speaker of the House, Fox News contributor Newt Gingrich is back with us. It's almost breathtaking, Mr. Speaker. You know, 2 hours before the attack, the president is saying that ISIS is contained. Remember, it wasn't long ago he was referring to them as the JV team. Meanwhile, they have taken over cities that we won in Iraq. And then Hillary Clinton during the debate tonight saying that I don't think we are at war with radical Islam, and Bernie Sanders believing that climate change is a bigger national security threat than radical Islam. I mean, how out of touch can they be? How can they be so wrong so often? Thoughts?
Well, I was asked this the other night on a show, and I said, partly because they're nuts. And I think you have to understand, they believe in a fantasy world. That's a short answer. Yeah, but they believe in a fantasy world. I mean, the President of the United States may be the most dangerous president in national security terms in American history. He lives in a fantasy world. It's a fantasy world about Russia. It's a fantasy world about the Middle East. It's a fantasy world about Libya. I mean, it's a fantasy world about bringing unchecked, unverified, unvalidated Syrians in significant numbers to the United States. Hillary Clinton is part of the same fantasy world. And she was Secretary of State for 4 years. It is a disaster. And I think it's a great test to the American people whether or not you can watch this horror show in Paris and learn nothing from what just happened. Let me just say one thing. My very dear friend of mine, Bill Fortune, wrote a book last year called Days of Wrath, which I recommend to every American in the light of Paris. Days of Wrath is about an Islamic assault on American schools and the fact that gun-free zones are terrific unless you have terrorists. And then they just create a slaughtering zone. People need to look at what happened in Paris and ask themselves, what actions do we take this coming week, not in 5 years, this coming week, to recognize how dangerous this is.
Mr. Speaker, I got to wonder, have we not learned anything from 9/11, the 9/11 Commission report saying they are at war with us, we are not at war with them? And this president, it's almost pathological, his inability to say radical Islamic terrorists. You know, him clinging to these ridiculous notions that Fort Hood was an instance of workplace violence as Major Hassan killed all of these people shouting Allahu Akbar, or calling them man-caused disasters or overseas contingency operations. Add to that the Iranian deal, which is, in my mind, may turn out to be worse than Munich 1938.
Look, I think it may well be, and may be much more dangerous than Munich was. And Munich started the Second World War, so it was a nightmare. But I gave a speech in early 2003 and said that the State Department was fundamentally failing to serve the United States. All of that, everything I said over a decade ago is still true. What you have is an establishment worldview personified by Obama, but he's not the heart of it. There's an entire worldview on our campuses, in many of our newsrooms, in the State Department, that basically is not prepared to deal with how hard the world is going to be. We have real enemies. Those enemies are quite prepared to cut off your head. If they get a nuclear weapon, they're going to use it. We temporarily now have a moment to say to ourselves, what are we going to do? And I'll give you just one example for the U.S. Congress. They should move this coming week to cut off all funding for any Syrian refugee to come to the United States. We have no reason to believe that we can vet these people, that we know who are the terrorists and who aren't the terrorists. And it is madness. It's suicidal for a country to pay to bring its own enemies into its own bosom.
We would be basically duplicating the same mistakes that France made, that I would argue probably led to what happened yesterday in France.
Sure.
You know, I think about evil in our time, and a president that referred to them the JV team, and you know, and then we got to now look at the refugee crisis, the 2016 campaign. You know, the president now talking about 255,000 refugees from Syria, from Iraq, from elsewhere around the world, and then of course we still have wide open borders in a post 9/11 world. The immigration was already a huge issue in this campaign. What impact of what happened yesterday, the comments of Hillary and Bernie Sanders today, do you think all of this has on this race?
Well, look, it's going to be very, very polarizing. The fact is the Democrats cannot come to grips with the fact that we have active enemies. They can't come to grips with the fact, remember, this is the second major attack in Paris this year. The original attack on the magazine was this year, and we were all horrified, although the president wasn't moved enough to actually go to Paris. He issued another totally banal and pathetic statement last night where he could not bring himself to say who the enemy was. He could, but he talked in grand language about all of humanity. Baloney. Part of humanity wants to kill the other part of humanity. They prove it every single day. It's time to get real about the fact that our first goal has to be victory if we're ever going to get to peace.
Let me play for you. We all know the comments that the president made about Christianity and about the Crusades, and there's been a mass slaughter of Christians and Yazidis, and we have done little to help them. And the terrible deeds that he said were done in the name of Jesus Christ. And yet here, I want to go through a history, a montage of his comments about Islam, and I want you to give us your take of what the psychology is in his mind about not being able to say the words radical Islam. Listen to this.
The United States is not and will never be at war with Islam. And I'm also proud to carry with me the goodwill of the American people and a greeting of peace from Muslim communities in my country. Assalamu alaikum. Islam is not part of the problem in combating violent extremism. It is an important part of promoting peace. Our enemies respect no religious freedom. Al-Qaeda's cause is not Islam. It's a gross distortion of Islam. The future must not belong to those who slander the Prophet of Islam. ISIL is not Islamic. No religion condones the killing of innocents, and the vast majority of ISIL's victims have been Muslim. We have reaffirmed again and again that the United States is not and never will be at war with Islam. Islam teaches peace.
add to that, Mr. Speaker, what Hillary said tonight, what Bernie Sanders tonight, and how do you interpret their inability? It's not even a reluctance or resistance; it's a refusal.
Historians someday will look back and see this as almost a psychosis. This is a psychological problem. This is not an intellectual problem. If you want a stark comparison, look at President al-Sisi of Egypt, who is a practicing Muslim, by the way, and it's a bit much for an American president who is presumably Christian to be lecturing Muslims about what Islam is. Presumably they have some notion of their own religion. They don't need lectures from the American president. But look at what al-Sisi said, who is a practicing Muslim and who went to see the major imams at the Cairo University and lectured them ferociously and said, look, we're allowing ourselves to be isolated from the world by accepting a radical version which frightens everybody, and you have an obligation to fight it. Now, al-Sisi, as a practicing Muslim, understands vastly better than Barack Obama or Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders what's at stake here, and it is a mutant version of Islam, but a very real version of Islam, which is prepared to kill people if they don't submit.
All right, Mr. Speaker, we appreciate your time. I think this will grow as a huge issue in this campaign, and thank you for being with us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.